I'm joined now by Justin Glaw. Justin, you've just published an explosive new piece for Rolling Stone. Your last piece made massive national news, exposing how 70 election officials across the country have already expressed election denialism and are now in positions of power to delay certification. But you've now got new reporting exposing some of the email communications here. Can you walk us through what you found?
Yeah, so basically, it's not really too big of a surprise, I guess, to now have sort of a look behind the curtain of how these new rules about certification have come about. So those new rules have been passed in the last few weeks. And basically what they do is they give county election officials throughout Georgia more discretion to refuse to certify election results, which, I think you can guess which way that's going to go. For results of elections that Donald Trump doesn't win. And so the emails that I have are between Dr. Janice Johnston, who people might remember from the August 3rd Trump rally in Atlanta, who stood and waved to the crowd when Trump called out 3 members of the state election board. So the emails are between her and several county election officials throughout the state who are sort of pushing for these rules about more power to refuse to certify results. And we sort of knew this was coming in a way because we knew that, for instance, Julie Adams in Fulton County and her Republican in Fulton County, Mike Cohen, were behind these certification rules. I sort of suspected that this guy, David Hancock in Gwinnett County, was behind them. But really what it shows is just how sort of deep and widespread the coordination on all of this stuff goes, which is, really all to benefit Trump. These are all, Trump supporting election deniers. And so, like I said, it's sort of a look behind the curtain at all of this stuff.
I guess legally speaking, is the fact that there's now written communication that's found between these people, between people who are avowed Trump supporters and election denialists and people who are at positions lower than them at the county level, does this open them up to legal exposure, for example, if some type of RICO suit came forward?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think from a legal perspective, the thing that jumps out immediately to me is another thing that they're coordinating on, Johnston at the SCB and David Hancock in Gwinnett County, is these voter purges that have been happening all across the state. And, there's been a lot of news in the last, 48 hours about these voter purges elsewhere. And, there's already a lawsuit that was filed last week that basically alleges these voter purges are illegal because they've occurred within 90 days of elections, which is a violation in the National Voter Registration Act. So I think that they're opening themselves up to potential litigation that way. And yeah, I mean, I have sort of started to think of connecting all of these dots between, the Georgia State Election Board, county election board officials, people at the Republican National Committee, the Georgia Republican Party. Tying all of these different groups and people together, you might think that this could be the potential web that is at the heart of the next election interference RICO case that is on hold right now in Fulton County from the 2020 election. So, we're not anywhere close to that yet, but it's good, I guess, that they're communicating via email so that I can grab these things via open records requests so that we can see who all's talking about this stuff, because I think it might come in handy at some point for some folks.
Has the fact that you've been digging into this, has this prevented them from moving forward, inhibited them from moving forward at all, or are they still barreling ahead with their plans as they were doing before?
Yeah, no, they're still doing all of that. And in fact, just before we got on this call right now, somebody texted me because the state election board has a brand new Twitter/X account that they are taking out for a test ride tonight that's being managed by Dr. Janice Johnston, who's tweeting tonight from this account, I guess in some sort of attempt to, shore up the troops, as it were, who are, very fired up about what they perceive to be the targeting of these pro-Trump members of the state election board, which has really just come down in the last, few days. We talked about it yesterday, with Kemp asking the attorney general, whether or not he can remove these members. They got sued in a lawsuit that dropped last night over these certification rules. So, after a few weeks and, months of pretty much, getting away with and doing, whatever they wanted, they're now starting to see some of the repercussions of those actions.
And which repercussion of the few that you named do you think is going to pose the biggest problem for them?
I think they're probably going to lose in a significant manner with that lawsuit that was filed last night. I mean, I think that a court is probably going to decide that the certification rules that they passed are not just outside the bounds of the state election board's authority. Keep in mind, these are appointed officials. But I think that a court is probably also going to decide that they're against Georgia election law. I think it's definitely easier to say that they're outside the purview of the state election board because, let's keep in mind, these are appointed officials. They're not elected. And one of the criticisms that's been levied against them is that, they're essentially legislating as appointed officials and creating, they're called rules, but they effectively act in some cases as laws that can govern millions and millions of Georgia voters in terms of rules that are being put on ballots and polling locations and poll watchers and, of course, certification.
Was there anything else that stood out at you, struck you from based on your newest reporting for Rolling Stone?
Yeah, I think definitely the voter perch stuff was. They're basically working with election denial activists who, claim to have, a great analysis that shows that there's all these, illegal voters on the voter rolls, and they think that they're going to find fraud that way.
This is very reminiscent of cyber ninjas.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good comparison because that's the type of people that they're working with, who say, I've got a forensic computer expert who was able to figure all this stuff out. And it's like, we also have the Secretary of State and county election boards who also do this work all the time to make sure that, improperly registered voters aren't on these rolls. But yeah, sure. I guess David Cross and his buddy who tweets under the Twitter handle Mad Liberals, they're going to be the guys who are going to crack the case. The other thing that really stood out to me, which is kind of more of like just a humorous thing, I guess, is that in these emails, you see David Hancock at one point just sort of lament the fact that these votes on certification, they seem to be like ceremonial. He's saying, like, what's the point of having these votes on certification if we're just supposed to always vote for certification? And of course, the irony of that is like he's so close to figuring it out. He's really close to figuring out that, yes, this is a ministerial duty. There's 100 years of Georgia case law that says this is not up to your discretion. This is not an opportunity for you to launch an investigation into voter fraud or voting machines or whatever. And, he's sitting there in the emails being like, well, I don't understand why we can't just vote no on this stuff. So that was something that stuck out to me.
Right. I mean, Mark Elias likes to say that if hundreds of years ago, when these processes were being put together, if Excel existed, that's what would have done the job. But instead, they had people do it because Excel didn't exist at the time. And so now these people are trying to wrap their heads around why they're little more than just a glorified Excel spreadsheet.
Right. And, I've heard the analogy, too, that they are not really the refs, they're the scoreboard. And and they're in a situation where they think they're the refs. And one of the things that was brought up to me when I was talking to people for this story is I talked to a former Democratic member of the Fulton County Election Board, and she said that one of her concerns with one of these certification rules, which is the reasonable inquiry rule, which, any reasonable inquiry can be used to say basically like we're going to
hold it's completely subjective.
Right. It's very subjective. It's very vague. And, one of her concerns is that, a reasonable inquiry could entail, I don't have time as an election official to read all these documents right now. I need to take them home for the weekend. And what do you think is going to happen when they take them home for the weekend? They're going to put them in the hands of, the David Crosses of the world and other election denial activists who then, with that very intricate, complex, confusing, and detailed information, could pretty much drum up any narrative that they want to. Oh, this tabulator poll sheet doesn't match with, there's any number of ways that they could use that information to concoct a narrative of widespread voter fraud. And that's why that reasonable inquiry rule she thinks is so potentially pernicious.
All right, Justin, let's wrap up with this. What are you looking at now as this process plays itself out? I know that there's a lot of like open threads here. So what are you focused on as this process continues to play itself out in the coming days and weeks?
Tying this up all of this coordination on sort of election subversion up the chain of command to the Republican National Committee, to the Trump campaign, and further solidifying the ties between what's happening in places like Gwinnett and Fulton County to what the Trump campaign is trying to do at a national level in terms of calling, essentially what they're doing is calling the results of the election into question before a single vote is even cast.
Right.
That's definitely my main focus going forward.
All right. Well, your reporting has been hugely consequential here. So how can people read more from you?
I write a Substack newsletter called American Doom, and the website is american-doom.com.
Okay, and I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. For people watching right now to support the work that Justin does, please go ahead and sign up for that newsletter. It is a great newsletter, obviously full of a ton of really useful and valuable information. Justin, as always, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks a lot.